Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and it is time, once again, for another review. This time I'm taking a look at a 5th edition adventure/setting combo from Mad Mage Games, The Heist of the Mad King's Jewel. This is actually the full setting follow-up to a pay-what-you-want module that I took a look at on one of my free/pay-what-you-want streams a while back, King Zadwur Belanesque. I was given the opportunity to take a look at the full product by the developer. As mentioned, The Heist of the Mad King's Jewel is a 5th edition offering, both an adventure and a setting that can be used for further adventures. It is available in both PDF and print-on-demand format and clocks in at just over 300 pages. As usual, I will go ahead and go over the presentation and outline in brief, cover each section in more detail, and then wrap up with my thoughts at the end. I will be basing this review on the PDF version. The Heist of the Mad King's Jewel features the gnomish city of New Mascopolis, a sort of steamwork and magic fantasy setting within a larger general medieval fantasy world, which opens itself up to both standard 5th edition characters as well as ones native to the city and the setting itself. There is an entire list of races and sub-races at the end of the book if you're looking to make characters that fit in with the overall setting, which includes both species and individual cultures from the wider world beyond the limits of the city that the adventure takes place in, hinting at a much more expansive setting to come. Although technically geared for characters of 4th level and above, taking them all the way to 9th level and beyond, it does have that introductory adventure available separately, King Zadwur Belanesque, which may allow you to start characters at a slightly lower level, as well as give them an introduction to the background and the technologies of the setting that they are about to be exploring. As the title suggests, The Heist of the Mad King's Jewel is all about a heist, and most of the adventure material and subquests within are a similar smattering of investigations, negotiations, mini-heists, and other tasks that can be accomplished within an urban environment. In terms of layout, Heist of the Mad King's Jewel is your pretty standard 5th edition fare, with full-color interior, text in an easy-to-read 2-column format, with inline charts where needed. There's a good mix of color art and black and white illustrations ranging from inline to full page. Maps and battle maps are sprinkled throughout where necessary as well, done in a few different styles, much like the inline art itself. I will say that this gives the art a moderately inconsistent feel to it, although that's kind of up to personal preference. It is exacerbated when it comes to the maps, but none of the art really takes away from the overall tone and feel of the adventure described. All of them are individually rather well done, or well selected. I just wish there were a tad more attention to design cohesiveness overall. Just a minor nitpick here and there. And before I get into the details of the contents itself, here's my usual commentary on the editing. In the case of the Heist of the Mad King's Jewel, I don't have any complaints for once. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't find the odd typo here or the misused word there, but technically speaking, the writing is extremely good and well put together, well edited and organized, on point. There are minor errors that every product has, and aside from those, I have to congratulate the team at Mad Mage for nailing one of the more commonly easily avoidable shortfalls of RPG production in general. Good on you. Now on towards the content itself. Heist of the Mad King's Jewel is divided into 3 major sections across just over 300 pages, with a basic introduction preceding the first section, which is basically a background on the city of New Mascopolis and its surrounding lands. This section has a history of the city, foreign relations with other civilizations, details on the economy and trade, a look at demonology, religion, and magic. There's details on the communication and transportation within the city, a quick layout of the ecosystem of Mascopolis and its surrounding terrain, a look at the internal factions and their relations, and then finally a list of important characters within the story. The second section is where the adventure itself is fleshed out. It consists of a hub area, a hideout/safe house, and then a string of small to mid-sized mini-adventures of various sorts, all of which lead towards the eventual goal of obtaining the Mad King's Jewel from a bank vault. Finally, the third section covers the Appendices, the player content such as the races, sub-races, and class specializations, new magical items, locations that may be visited multiple times during the adventure, and finally the stat blocks for many of the monsters and NPCs that you could encounter during the adventure. In more detail, the introduction starts by giving a basic background on what should be expected of the campaign, as well as an overview of the story and of the book itself. The whole premise of the Heist of the Mad King's Jewel is that the party has been commissioned to steal a gem from the crown of an ancient gnomish king, now held within the vault of a bank. The heist must be prepared for, so the party must undertake a series of subquests to gather information, contacts, allies, and gear, all to accomplish the job and then escape the city with their lives. Along the way, they can actually decide who to work for, who to work with, and how to approach the various problems. The introduction does have a list of the most major quests to accomplish along the way, along with the recommended levels for each. Section 1, as I mentioned, covers the details of the city itself. It does this in a very thorough way, covering more than what is required for the heist, which will enable the GM to adapt to unexpected situations that the PCs may generate, as well as to potentially run more adventures within the city itself. It starts with a history of Mascopolis, which, briefly stated, covers the original city of gnomes and dwarves, the fall of that city, and then the migration of the populace and the building of the new Mascopolis city. Important names and terms are put in bold here, which can be useful for quickly tracking down references. The section on foreign relations tells of the major powers that Mascopolis currently deals with, either officially or sometimes unofficially, but also gives some very loose background on areas well outside of the city, which makes the world feel fuller than what is presented in this particular product. The economy section goes on to detail the economy and advancement of Mascopolis, which is basically a sort of industrial advancement in an otherwise medieval or Renaissance-based world. It details the various economic sectors and what foreign trade exists in a bit more depth in some settings, simply because a lot of that may be useful background chatter during the adventure itself. The section on demonology, religion, and magic goes over the pantheons, describing the various gods of various areas and their focus, but it also leaves the origin and power of these gods to a sort of vague, nebulous kind of thing, so the GM can adapt them according to taste for the particular game that they want to run. There's also this idea that some unwholesome chaos lies at the center of the planet, and while that is also left intentionally vague, just to allow the GM to use it as needed, there are a number of conflicting origin stories for it that can give insight as to how each race and region views it. And these shouldn't be taken as law, these are just how these races view this, and they actually contradict each other in places, which is a good touch. The section on the communication system not only covers the actual communications, but also basically the transportation and other aspects of the city. As an industrial/fantasy city, it has a press, it has a post office, bureaucracy, even a railroad system. And these elements are very reminiscent of Victorian-era organizations, meaning that they are powerful to the point of being power players in the government itself. The Mascopolis Rail Guard is covered here, a sort of semi-independent paramilitary force that controls and defends the railroads. A number of quest hooks are added here for interacting with that faction in case the players decide they want to befriend them. That will, of course, have benefits. The section on the ecosystem of the city itself covers not only the flora and fauna of the tunnels around Mascopolis, built into a mountain as it is, but also the wilderness around it. The next section covers the various districts of the city, and there are quite a few. There are several quarters, and not all of them are immediately relevant to the adventure itself. However, all of them are detailed well enough to run events in them just in case. The relevant NPCs and their relations are given, even if not really connected to the main storyline, as it might happen if the party, decides that they need their help, then that option is there. It goes a long way towards helping catch curveballs that the players may throw. Maps of each area are given here too on their respective areas. It is a pretty large sector indeed. The section is massive, comprising the bulk of the settings section, and also suggests a few subquests that aren't part of the main quest line or that should be run in the background just in case. For instance, there is an investigator who will catch on relatively early that the party has been hired for something, and then details are given on how he might learn more about the party's plans, as well as what he'll do at each stage depending on how much he knows when that stage comes up. The section on factions does bear a special mention. Due to the urban nature of the setting, as well as the technological level, there are a number of factions which the party will interact with. A few of these are detailed here in length. Beyond the Railguard, there are the Black Scarves, a sort of pseudo-socialist revolutionary group, with a few sub-factions within it. The Mascopolis Secret Service is tasked not only with keeping the peace and tabs on various other elements of society, but also making sure the export of the technological marvels of the city are controlled in that they don't get out to less civilized areas. The Shadow Shivs are a sub-branch within the particular Secret Service that is tasked with ensuring that the lower classes remain disorganized. The first major section finishes off with the Dramatis Persona section, which goes over the various major figures within the city that the party might interact with, giving details on their histories, their motivations, their goals, and their interactions, and more. Section 2 of the book, at large, generally covers the major quests. Now, I won't go into detail in every one, but I will highlight a few. The main quest is, of course, to steal the jewel, and to that end, this section starts with a sort of quest and interaction that gets the party involved and gives them initial leads. This includes a hideout that the party can get to use as a sort of base of operations. It starts in pretty poor shape, but it has a map of areas that can be improved over time given enough capital investment, which can go a long way towards keeping the group and their plans undiscovered, as well as giving them a place to retreat to, rest up in, and more importantly, to store their resources and loot. The hub area of the Trade Emporium is introduced next, and it serves as a sort of resupply depot, quest pickup spot, and a fence for stolen goods. The quests are listed in brief here, and then gone over in the pages that follow. Most of these quests allow the party to acquire information, gear, or allies, and some are dependent on others being given first. Not all of them are required, and some may be done in alternate orders, providing different paths for parties to progress through the adventure. The bulk of the book is then each quest in turn. They're generally set up with a heading, an introduction, and then a list of encounters or encounter areas. Boxed text is present where necessary, and the encounters are generally described with a paragraph under a single heading. Where maps are required and not already part of the commonly accessible places, they are included in the particular quest heading. These quests are extremely varied in style and approach, which will allow different sorts of characters to shine in each one. Some are event-driven errands, such as making deliveries, serving as bodyguards, etc. Some are investigations, with different areas containing clues, sometimes with timed events running in the background. The search for a serial killer and the rescue of an alchemist come to mind. Some are straight-up hits, making an investigator disappear or taking out a troublesome thug, and a few are proper, full-on dungeon crawls, or I should say building crawls, as there are a few small dungeons, but mostly there's a number of mapped-out buildings where characters can move from room to room and see what's in there. This section culminates in the bank job itself, which incorporates elements of all of the above. Characters will have to use the leads that they gathered during play to infiltrate the bank, which is a full-fledged dungeon crawl full of traps and puzzles in order to get to the vault. They can grab the item that they're after as well as a few other things, and they have to make good on returning the crown's jewel to whichever faction that they decided to side with, before escaping the city with their lives and loot. There's even a provisional adventure for if the party decides to keep the crown, which can make life difficult for them, but can also be very rewarding. The final major section of the book are the Appendices. The first one is the various player information, basically a collection of setting-specific races and various subclasses. This is interesting since the faces on the one hand are rather familiar to those who enjoy generic fantasy gaming, but they've been given their own subtle little tweaks to make them fit in with the setting better. Backgrounds on each are given, including history and their relations. Their languages are listed here as well, and the few subclasses are only 2 of them, but they're very apt for the setting. There's the Saboteur Rogue that specializes in sabotage and demolitions. And then there's the Bardic College of Diplomacy, which focuses on propaganda and convincing crowds. And there's a few new feats that focus on engineering and explosives, as well as additional backgrounds: the Foreign Spy, the Mechanic Upstart, the Native Muscopolitan, and the Pitboard. The next section covers items, starting with firearms, which are of course available in this adventure, although they should be transported with care, since it is, after all, a pretty oppressive city in some instances. There are then pages full of magical items, some of which are relatively powerful, but almost all of which are actually very unique. The locations section covers a few taverns which will probably be visited multiple times in the adventure, each with a keyed map and NPCs that frequent the place. There's the Rusty Pick that's located in the pits, the Noble Nymph that's located in the upper areas. There is a cathedral adjacent to the bank detailed here as well, as are the basic blueprints of the bank to be used as a player handout if they are acquired in character somehow. There are even diagrams as to the bank's surveillance system. I do like the art in this one. There are some really, despite my complaints about the inconsistencies, there's some really nice artwork in this game. So, the adventure closes out with stat blocks, which not only do they have them for named NPCs, but also for the generic NPCs and creatures. There's a fairly large number of them, and they range widely in CR. They are all in a format similar to what you would expect from a 5th edition product, although there aren't any illustrations here. There are a couple of them, but not many of them. And I'm actually kind of sad, because some of these are really, really interesting creatures. The book then wraps up with a few pages thanking the crowdfunding campaign and the usual SRD legal stuff at the end. So, what do I think about Heist of the Mad King's Jewel? Well, I did mention some of my criticisms already regarding the format earlier. I do think it is well edited, and I do like the art, and I like a lot, but the overall city maps and the variation in pictures does just give it a slightly inconsistent, ever so slightly amateurish feel, which really is sad because the rest of it is so professionally put together. It's actually a top-notch product in every other case. So I want to say it doesn't really detract that much from the module, since the art is, after all, very nice. It's just a little bit of a nitpick. The book itself is very well organized, although I would have liked to have seen some differences between major quests and minor quests a little bit more obvious. And there's a couple ones that are listed in the general background of the city itself that could probably merit being put in the master list of quests. And again, that's just a nitpick. If you're reading the whole thing, probably not going to have a problem with it. If I had to suggest anything regarding the overall layout, and I mean absolutely anything, I almost hate to say it because it borrows from an idea I see in some WotC products, and I hate to give them credit for much of anything anymore, but there is a lot, and I mean a whole lot of NPCs. So a page of just the names of NPCs and a very, very brief description of their import, like maybe a line or less, would have been helpful, like a glossary of NPCs, and maybe a glossary of titles. I know there's a glossary sidebar in here, but it only covers like 8 or 9 things. So like a master list, a master glossary would have been infinitely helpful. Now, I know the Dramatis Personae kind of does that, but there's just so much text in there because it's so rich in detail that a line item summary would have been very helpful for quick reference during play. I think this mostly stems from the fact that I personally am very terrible with names, so having something I can quickly glance at, especially with regards to fantasy names of different cultures, can be very helpful. That actually brings me to something that Heist of the Mad King's Jewel does rather well, I think. It genuinely puts a premium on making the different cultures and factions feel different from one another through more than just their write-ups. I mean, the write-ups go a long way towards it, but they feel like genuinely different. In many cases, they are similar to classic fantasy tropes, but not identical. Just similar enough to give you a grounding to get into the mindset, but then different enough from one another and from other fantasy genre things that they're easily identifiable as part of this game particularly, and that's something that goes underappreciated. The factions' motivations are fairly complex as well, making them feel more like actual organizations and less like just a collection of poorly thought out rabble that was put together for a quest. The variety of subquests and options to approach the main quest with are wonderful as well. Your generic hack and slash group, it's probably not going to appreciate it. You can actually do this campaign with a hack and slash group. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. There's certainly an art to pulling off various types of certain adventures, heists, investigations, negotiations. These are all the sorts of things that can be difficult to write up well, and since this adventure mostly consists of those, in my opinion, the Heist of the Mad King's Jewel pulls this off exquisitely. Furthermore, there's a ton of information within the module to give the GM all of the tools that they need to run these effectively, even if the party goes off the rails and tries something new. There's a reason that the city is as detailed as it is. It gives options to the party, and in a heist that puts a premium on scheming and planning, options are critical. Now you compare this with a certain other railroady subpar heist adventure produced a few years back by WotC that leaned almost entirely into nostalgia and served only as a prelude to an entirely different Mega Dungeon adventure. Or compared to that, the Heist of the Mad King's Jewel just blows that one out of the water in terms of options and freedom for the players. I really appreciate that. The introduction of semi-industrial technologies are well done too. There's a lot of thought given not only to simply how much damage a gun does, for instance, but how minor minutiae might be affected by the presence of both magic and technological might. It's not just ye old generic steampunk setting, although I detect some elements of, shall we say, MMORPG influence in terms of the design of the cities and the governments of the gnomes. Now that in itself is not a bad thing in my book, as someone who used to love cruising around Akanon and Nomerigan. I never could pronounce that. But this one, it sets itself apart, feeling both very high fantasy and kind of steampunk, and I like that. Now, I admit I am fond of magical, industrial, or fantasy steampunk settings. I'll admit that. And I am fond of heists and skullduggery when they're written well. So I may be a little biased here, but I really think that the Heist of the Mad King's Jewel is an excellent value for an extended campaign. Nitpicks aside, it is well written, it is lovely to flip through, it diverges from the usual combat, dungeon crawl-oriented ways of such campaigns that don't really, fit with heists, without devolving into a walking simulator type style of play that some people may like, but, it does offer a variety of options for characters of all types to shine. And that's kind of rare in a heist situation. With that in mind, I would only recommend it if your group is willing to play something heist-focused. If they're not, why would you be looking at this in the first place? But, they're not going to like it if they're not. If they are looking for a good heist, I can't recommend it highly enough. And I, for one, am looking forward to seeing the rest of this campaign world fleshed out, just to see how it goes. Now, if you have any doubts about it, as I said, the predecessor adventure, King Zadwar Belanesque, is available as a pay-what-you-want product and gives a good taste of the setting and a good introduction to things. So there is that, and that's a bonus all the way around. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to wrap it up here. This has been the RPG Crawler with my review of the Heist of the Mad King's Jewel. As always, I'll drop links below where you can pick it up and to its predecessor adventure as well. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribe Star, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.